Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC guy. If you remember, about 4.5 months ago, on the 30th of August, I uploaded a video reviewing this guy right here, Accurascale Manor, the new Accurascale Manor locomotive. So what I want to do today is go back and take another look at this locomotive now that I've had it for 4.5 months, so we can see the good, the bad, and the ugly things that I've discovered about it. So let's get started. Hit that little red subscribe button, and when the little bell comes up, click on it and click all. Okay, so right off, let's just take a quick review of what I consider to be the good parts about this locomotive, because it is a beautiful locomotive. And just about everybody that I know that owns one of these was impressed with the paint job and the livery on these locomotives. This is just a beautiful satin finish, and it is set off with contrast by the flat finish here on the smoke box, which you hardly ever see on any other locomotives. Now, the other thing that I wanted to point out about the details on these is the copper top to the chimney is beautiful, well done, and as I found out from playing around with the chimney, that's actually a turn metal insert in there that they have done in order to give you that nice copper finish. I also went ahead and attached the etched number plates on the side of the cab and the nameplates here on the side. So I think that's a great addition that they've done, providing those etched plates so that you don't have to go buying them from Fox or someone like that. Everybody that has one of these just remarks about the details in the cab. Very, very well done. And also the very bright Firebox Flicker that you get that comes on automatically, at least with DCC, or when you hit F8. Another thing is the speed control with DCC. It is a very nice crawler under DCC control. And we'll talk about other things in a minute here. The Keep Alive that was included as part of the circuit board adds to that illusion of a heavy locomotive moving across the rails, and it prevents any of the jerky motion that you might get when you hit dirty track or a dead frog or anything like that. It just floats right over it. Okay, let's talk for a minute then about some of the bad things or disappointing things about it. First off, a lot of people who bought the DC version of this locomotive were disappointed about the slow speed operation, because it does seem to have a fairly high starting voltage and it immediately kicks into gear and takes off. So at the very low end, it doesn't have very great slow speed performance, and that's something that doesn't seem to improve with breaking in or running over the last 4.5 months. It just doesn't change at all in that respect. Another thing that I noted about this is when you first start up in speed steps 1 and 2 at very slow speeds, there is a grinding noise coming from the motor or the gears. I think it's probably coming from the motor. And it only occurs in the forward direction, and by the time you get to speed step 3, it starts to fade out. So it's not something that is all that annoying, because it sort of sounds like the creaking sound of a locomotive when it first starts up anyway. So it's never really bothered me that much. Another thing that some people have mentioned about these is that there's some slowdown on curves, and I'm not sure if that's due to their curves or due to possibly some problems with their track laying, and that there are some tight spots in the curves. If the distance between the backsides of the drivers is a little bit over what it should be, which is 14.4 to 14.5 millimeters, that might also tend to slow things down as you go through the curves. So check your back-to-back measurements on your drivers. Make sure they come into specs. Okay, finally, let's talk about some of the ugly things about these. The first thing about them is the circuit board here. Now, this is the Keep Alive that was included as part of the circuit board. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which way you went, these were designed in order to work with the LokSound or ESU decoders, so that you don't get Keep Alive power if you're using other manufacturers' decoders. Now, the folks at You Choose DCC in the UK told me that they have gotten it to work with a Zemo decoder, and I was able to get it to work using a Tsunami 2 decoder from SoundTraxx. Now that did require me contacting someone at ESU who was able to discover that the keep alive is actually controlled by what is called AUX functions. And once I was able to find out which AUX function it was that controls the keep alive and activate it on my Tsunami 2 decoder, then I was able to turn the keep alive on and off. However, getting that information was a pain in the neck, and plus there are no comprehensive lists that I know of out there that tell you how to activate that particular function on other folks' decoders. Now I will include in the description to this video a short write-up of what this entails, but you might have some difficulty finding that out for other manufacturers' decoders. Now I know that it should work with a LokPilot decoder, so you might try that. And I will include that instruction in the description as well. So take a look at that if you're interested. So there really is no easy way to get around this unless you can find out which function might turn on the keep alive with another brand of decoder. The other thing that I want to talk about, and I'll show you some information on here, is the speaker, because a lot of people complained about the low volume output from the speakers. And remember, there are two speakers in this locomotive. There's a speaker in here somewhere, and there's also one in the boiler of the locomotive. So you've got two speakers. Most of the sound that you will hear comes from the one in the boiler. So it's kind of limiting in that respect. So let me take a look right here and show you what is involved with that. I've taken the screws out that hold the circuit board in place, and you can see here this is the enclosure for the speaker, and that lifts right out. So I'm going to take that out and show that to you. So you can see here there are two slots. This one has the speaker in it, and this one right here is open. And the reason for that is they originally planned on providing two speakers in the tender, but they decided instead to go with just one in the tender and one in the boiler to give it a deeper, richer sound. Unfortunately, there's a couple of problems with the installation the way they did it. For one thing, if you look right here, you can see, I'll try to get this so you can see it, there's a couple of cutouts here in the side. I can actually poke my pointer through that. And they included those because of the wheel flanges coming up through the bottom of the tender to clear the sides. Unfortunately, in order for a speaker to develop full sound, it has to be in an airtight enclosure. So by including these cutouts here, that obviously creates a problem. And that cutout, unfortunately, covers both openings or both slots for speakers. So there's no way around that. Also, the speaker itself, and it's difficult to get this out, and I don't want to ruin the speaker trying to do it. You can pry it out using an X-Acto knife blade or something like that. But at any rate, this is the Sugar Cube speaker, and I've got another one that I took out of a second locomotive right here. And what they have done is there is a little adhesive gasket placed here on the bottom of the speaker, and that's what holds it into this open slot. And unfortunately, the way they did it, it's on the bottom, all the way on the bottom of the opening here. Now, the best way to get your best sound from a Sugar Cube speaker is to put it on an enclosure like this one here that has a backspace, a space underneath of the speaker. And I believe the folks at LokSound specify that with their standard speaker, you need something like 6 or 7 millimeters of space underneath of the speaker to develop proper sound. So that sits right here like that. And if it had this much backspace, that would be great. Unfortunately, it doesn't. It has no backspace underneath of the speaker. So that's the reason why you get very poor sound. There's no backspace, and you've got the cutout here that prevents an airtight enclosure. So those two things are part of the problem here. Now, what I have done, and I'll show you how I fixed it in Accurascale Manor, I took the coal load out, and this is an iPhone 4 speaker, and I simply cut it off here and sealed it using some styrene. and then used it as my speaker. And these are an 8 ohm speaker. They are very good. They're almost equivalent to a comparable sized speaker like this one here, this Sugar Cube speaker. And then you can see here, I have the 2 wires from the speaker going down through a couple of small holes drilled in the tinder coal slope sheet there. And then I simply soldered those 2 wires to these pads right here. So these are your speaker contacts. They would normally make contact with the little springs here on the speaker. So that would be the way. And then just ran those up through there. So that's how I did it. Now, what I recommend you do, though, is I'm going to include a link to a video above me right here on my left, your right side of the screen that shows how to do this using a speaker and enclosure from roadsandrails.co.uk. And you can go right to that website and order one of those. Right now, when I made this video, they were on sale. They have a very thin speaker enclosure, but it fills up the entire area back here in the tinder so that you can basically attach it to the underside of the tinder inside here and make that same type of connection. So I recommend that you use his speaker. It's a lot easier. Unfortunately, these iPhone 4 speakers are getting very hard to find. I purchased about 6 of them, I believe, from a source that had a bunch of them, but it's like I said, it's getting very hard to find these. The other thing that I wanted to point out about these, on Accurascale Manor, which was the first one that I got, it was very well lubricated. But when I got Anthony Manor, and I'll point out, I liked this locomotive so much, when I got Accurascale Manor, I turned around and bought Anthony Manor. So I have a pair of these now. Unfortunately, this one arrived from Accurascale, and it had no lubrication that I could see at all. So I had to you just remove these 4 screws here, and it gets you direct access to the gear inside, and you can put a little bit of gear lube on that, and also a few drops around the locomotive axles to lubricate the bearings. Any of the bearing surfaces that they show in the manual, I recommend lubricating those. Do not run this locomotive, do not give it a break-in run without checking to make sure that it is properly lubricated first. Because if you do that, run it for any amount of time with dry bearings, you're going to create problems. It's going to score your axles, and it can really damage the running characteristics of the locomotive if you're running this for an hour, half hour in each direction without any lubrication at all. Check the main gear here on the driving axle and make sure it's got some grease on it. Check all of the bearings around here. Make sure that they have a little bit of oil on each one. Check your bearings on your pilot wheels, and check all of the bearing surfaces on your valve gear and your connecting rods. Don't run these dry because you can really do serious damage to your locomotives. Well, that's about it. This is, I still think, a great locomotive. It's one of the best locomotives that I have in my collection of UK locomotives. The only one I think that's close is probably my Hornby Merchant Navy locomotives. They run beautifully as well. But other than that, it's a great runner, and I highly recommend them. I suspect that they will be coming out with another run of these, just like they're doing with the Deltic soon. So, don't be afraid to go ahead and purchase one of these if you missed one on the first release, or if you want to pick up a second one. But just keep in mind those little problems or those little issues that I mentioned. So, have a great weekend, have a great week, and we'll see you here next week with another video from the DCC Guy. Bye now.